Welcome to the Modern Husbands Podcast, where any combination of Dr. Bruce Ross, Christian Sherrill, and Brian Paige host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money in the home as a team. I'm Brian Paige, founder of Modern Husbands. Sometimes our listeners want more support than a podcast can give, individual or couple support, which I provide as an accredited financial counselor and fair play facilitator. Details can be found at modernhusbands.com. Today's episode is the second of a three-part series, Empowering Men to Partner or Lead at Home, Men and the Mental Load. Today's guests are Dr. Julie Wayne and Paige Connell. Dr. Julie Wayne is a professor at Wake Forest University. She's a leading scholar on work-family integration and gender equity. Her research uncovers the structural and psychological barriers to balanced partnerships and how men can take intentional steps to reduce the mental load on their partners. Paige Connell is a mental load strategist who equips families with clear tools to divide responsibilities fairly and prevent burnout. Her work, which she shares with hundreds of thousands of her followers on social media, translates the invisible into systems couples can use to feel more connected, supported, and balanced. The mental load isn't just about who does the chores, it's about who thinks about the chores. Today, we will talk about making invisible labor visible. Enjoy the show. Can you define mental load, cognitive labor, and the consequences of imbalance, either men taking more on or women taking more on?
Sure. So, there are the clinical terms, and I'm sure Julie could list all of them from her research, cognitive labor, emotional labor, all of these things. And I think people say that all the time, and the average person goes, I don't really know what that means in my day-to-day life, right? And so when I describe the mental load, I tend to describe it as a never-ending to-do list in your brain of everything you need to know, do, and remember, whether that's for work, your family, for your extended family, your parents, your siblings, your friends, right? This mental load, I often like to remind people, it doesn't just show up when you become a parent, right? It exists in other dynamics in your life. It just becomes exponentially heavier when you become a parent, which is why I think parents really resonate with this terminology and why they are seeking out resources to navigate the mental load. And so, I like to tell people that the tricky part about the mental load is that this list, this never ending to-do list in your brain, it never really gets shorter, right? The second you check something off, there's something else you have to add to your list. So, I am currently cleaning out my kids' closets, right? And I'm switching it over. And when I switch that over, I realize I need to buy new pants and this kid needs new shoes. And my list continues to grow, even though I've technically checked off the closet switchover. And so I think that is the hardest part about the mental load for a lot of people. And when there's an imbalance in relationships, and the data shows that women tend to carry the bulk of the mental load, especially in parenting. When there's an imbalance, what I have found is that oftentimes it breeds resentment and frustration, and it puts this pressure on the relationship. And the person who carries the weight is feeling this resentment and frustration towards their partner. Their partner is feeling shame and maybe defensiveness, and they're a little bit angry because they feel like they're doing a good job, but it's never good enough, right? And so it creates this really tricky dynamic to navigate. And it's very weighted. It's not as simple as having a conversation about dishes. It's why does it feel so heavy to me when you don't do the dishes? What does that mean for me and for our family? And so I think it's a really a popular term right now. It's kind of having its moment, the mental load, because I think people are just becoming so much more aware of how it exists in their lives.
And I'm glad that there were two things that you pointed out there that I want to highlight. First is that there is resentment when people do not feel valued for the work that they're doing, particularly when that work is invisible.
Mm-hmm.
But the second is that when you look at the mental load, I think the data is that 72% of what the invisible labor that it takes to run a home on average is shouldered disproportionately to women. And I could have gotten that statistic.
I think it's 71. I think you were close.
71. Okay, all right.
We'll fact check it. Yeah.
Dr. Wayne, so your research has, and I know you're going to have a question for me in a moment, Paige, but I want to uncover, from the academic side, that more about your research, and that it's uncovered key psychological barriers to sharing the mental load in a relationship. Can you walk us through those?
Sure. So one of the first things you've already labeled, both of you, right? And it's this notion that it's invisible, right? So we can see maybe when the closet gets transferred, but the thinking about pants need to be bought and remembering that pants need to be bought, you can even delegate that, right? The task itself, but somebody's got to be paying attention to it, thinking about it, remembering, following through on that. And that's what's so hard about the mental load, is the very fact that it's invisible, right? And so, so much of it happens in our head, and that cognitive busyness, right? Especially when it's not just thinking about a task, toothpaste, toilet paper, pants, but it's actually worrying about, how are my kids doing, right? So one of the things that I think is important, Paige pointed out, like, it never goes away, and the shape and the form of it changes over your parenting stages, right? So they say little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems, right? And so as you're, Brian, I see you like, oh yeah, worrying about your kid and social media, and middle school is a really emotional, stressful time. It can be a beautiful time, right? And so all of that happens in our head. And so the very nature of the fact that it's invisible, we can see the dishes get done. We can see the laundry being folded or put away, the lawn being mowed. So just the fact that it's invisible often means that it is unappreciated because it's unseen, right? And so that's another barrier to kind of, and what can build this resentment is not only that you're doing it, but you don't feel seen. And when you aren't seen, you don't feel valued. And when you don't feel valued, it becomes a source of bitterness and resentment and taken for granted. And, I know in your earlier session, you were probably talking about cultural norms and societal expectations. And, we are socialized from a very early age that men provide and women care, right? And so one of the barriers is exactly that, is our organizations often operate under that assumption, right? And so that in and of itself is such a barrier. We might have formal organizational policies, but women feel more at liberty to use them without being penalized than do men. So informal support for men to be involved in the family is good at work. It's good for wives. It's good for kids. I'm sure you're very well aware of the research. Like, women are kind of the bread and butter, but dads are like the icing on the cake, and their involvement with their children, particularly their daughters, is really, really important to the well-being of children and families. Another barrier sometimes is just having to negotiate and navigate feelings of competence and control, right? So if I'm going to share it, I might have to allow someone, my partner, to do it differently than I might have done it. And speaking from my own personal experience, like, I'm willing to let my husband do a lot in terms of household tasks, but I have much greater sense of ownership or concern over my kids and their well-being than I do maybe the laundry or the color of the walls or pants. Like, there are certain balls that can be dropped, and others that really can't. And so sometimes, we say we want to share the mental load, but it can be difficult and tricky as we actually give up some ownership and control in that space. So just the very nature of it being invisible, we're socialized that women do it and men don't. And, the reality is, not only do women do more of it and have this resentment, but we see that women fare worse in terms of their life and relationship satisfaction as moms and parents than men do. Being married and having kids tends to benefit men in terms of their overall health and well-being, and it tends to, be detrimental for women. And I think this is one of the key reasons why. And so if we know what are those sources that make it difficult, we have to make them visible. We have to challenge societal norms and expectations in our homes and at work, and frankly at a public policy level as well. And we have to ask ourselves, what is it? How do we overcome if we have feelings of control or concern about their not being competent? Then, the same way I feel like a lot of leadership principles that we use at work apply at home. We don't just delegate a task and say, walk away and say, good luck, take care of it. And then when they fail, if we do that and they fail, we're like, I knew I couldn't trust you, right? Like there's steps to being great delegators.
I would love an example of where a couple has gone from burnout, right, to balance in a relationship.
Sure. I mean, I can just share my own relationship, but it's probably the easiest one for me to speak on.
I was kind of going there.
So to what you pointed out earlier, married my husband after being together for 10 years. I felt like I really knew who he was. I felt like we had a very equitable partnership. I felt like we were prepared for parenthood and for marriage. We knew what we were getting into, right? We knew what we were getting into, or I thought we did. But when we had kids, I tell people it's a bit like a snowball. It's small, but if it starts rolling down a snowy hill, it's going to pick up snow and it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's going to get faster and faster and faster. And one day you realize that snowball has got really far away from you and you don't know how to stop it, right? You don't know how to get away from this. And so that is kind of what the mental load felt like for me. It felt like, in marriage, it was fine. And then with the first kids, it was fine. And then with the third, it was a little harder. And then with the fourth, I reached a breaking point. I was like, I can't continue to be the default person for everything. And I will say this, I think this is common in a lot of relationships, which is that my partner is what people would define as a very hands-on, active dad. Terms we never use for women. Right? We never say a woman is a hands-on mom or an active mom or present mom. We don't say those things because it'd be weird if she wasn't, right? But for dads, because the assumption is that they're more at work, on paper and in practice, my husband was always there. The problem was he wasn't thinking about all of that background stuff, right? He didn't realize that, yes, he might have taken the kid to the doctor's appointment, but I filled out 10 forms. I called the doctor 3 times. I was on the phone with insurance and I did all of this work, hours of work, so he could take our son to get a flu shot or something, for example. And that part was missing. That gap was missing. And what Julie referenced was the accountability was always on me. So if he forgot to do something, the assumption was I was there. I love the ball metaphor. I think women use this all the time. I don't know that men use it as much. Maybe I'm wrong, Brian, but the rubber ball and glass ball, right? You're juggling all these balls. You're trying to keep them in the air. Julie's nodding. Brian, yeah, okay. And it's some balls you can drop and some you can't. And what I hear from women all the time is, yes, but sometimes I'm about to drop a glass ball and it feels like no one's there to help me pick it up. And I'm always picking them up for my husband, right? I hand him a glass ball, he drops it, I'm below him and I'm picking it up. And that is, I think, what the mental load can feel like when it's imbalanced, right? It can feel like you are the catch-all. You are the safety net. And I came to my partner at one point and I said, hey, I'm constantly thinking about you and the kids and the dog and making sure the home is functioning and everybody has what they need. And I don't feel like anyone's thinking about me. I was like, has anybody thought, is Paige okay? Does Paige need anything? Is she thriving? Did she eat lunch today? Nobody's worrying about me. And, I was resentful and frustrated. And, we weren't enjoying our marriage because I had all these feelings and he was like, it feels like you hate me. And I was like, I don't hate you. I just am having a really hard time enjoying this because my brain is at capacity. And that's how I used to describe it. I'm at capacity. I have no more space to give you my emotional labor and time. I have no more space to plan a date night. I have nothing left to give the world. This is it. And I, like many other women, also worked full time and I earned exactly the same amount of money as my husband. Yet he did work more hours than I did, right? Not exponentially more, but he works a job with a lot of overtime. And so, yeah, he worked more than me. And so even though I was earning an income and I was working full time, I was still bearing the burden of all this. And for us, Brian knows this, but we started off our journey with fair play. I heard Eve on a podcast, and it was like a light bulb went off in my brain. And that was the first time I was able to describe the mental load. So I tell people all the time, I think the first step in being able to balance this is just having the terminology, being able to say out loud what the mental load is, being able to make that invisible labor visible. I think Eve's game is a really great way to do that, but there's so many ways to do it. I tell people, just every little thought that pops into your brain, write it in a notebook or put it in your reminders app. Keep track for a week, 2 weeks, because oftentimes your partner will come to you and say, well, what can I do? How can I help? Women freeze and they're like, I don't even know how to answer that because the list is so incredibly long. And I could give you one thing, but that one thing's tied to 17 other things. And I don't know how to give you that, right? I don't know how to hand that over to you. And so for us, we started off with fair play, and we did the work of kind of working through the domestic labor as a first layer, and then the mental load as a second layer. And then the final layer of what we did actually, which I don't think people don't always go this far, is we did a time equity assessment. And we, in an Excel spreadsheet, tracked, kind of like researchers do, like how we use our time. How much time am I with the kids by myself? How much time are you with the kids by yourself? How much time do you get to work out? How much time do I get to work out? Right. And we did an assessment. And even though he worked more hours than me, he got more time alone, more time to himself. And I had close to no time to myself. And so we went that extra layer and we worked through what it would look like for me to have an equitable share of the time in our home. So that way we could both feel like we had a fair share and an opportunity to be people outside of this crushing mental load we all have. And so, I always tell people it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, and it's not something we stop talking about. We're still talking about it 3 years later because I think Julie mentioned this. The mental load changes, it shifts, it evolves, but it's never gone. And so we're constantly talking about how to optimize and make sure our home is running effectively and to share the work in an equitable way. And so that doesn't go away, but the conversations are so much easier now. It's a passing conversation. It's no longer we need to sit down and talk for 4 hours about how to fix this.
Well, I love how you talked about that, Paige, because, whatever it looks like, the key is making the invisible visible. And so, Eve has the cards, and Brian knows one of the things that I recommend is, if you don't have the book, like you're saying, write things down, put them on note cards, meet on a Sunday and say, okay, here's the things that let's figure out what needs to get done this week, and let's kind of divide the cards. And so you guys collected data, which I love, but the key is coming up with a way to make the invisible visible, right? Quantify it, put it in front of you so that everyone can see it. Brian knows I make the analogy that the invisible load feels like putting on a production in a theater, right? Because you're the one behind the scenes. Maybe you've designed the costumes, made sure the costumes got there. You trained the actors. You've directed the play. And like you, I think women often find that they're behind the scenes doing all this invisible work, but then the very active partner, shows up on the front row and they've got flowers and, at the end, it's such a beautiful performance and they're clapping and standing ovation. I think we've lost Brian.
Oh, no.
We got this. We can keep this.
Yeah, we're good.
Comes back. And he enjoys the show, right? And there's Brian. But I was saying, your partner is there in the front row. We're not saying these aren't active dads or husbands, but they show up in those moments and they enjoy everything that has been planned and done behind the scenes, while the director is probably, just, exhausted and not fully able to enjoy. Right. And so really sharing the invisible load is making it possible for your other partner to show up. I have tended to be the person to plan all the trips and the vacations or whatever we do as a family. And so while everyone else is enjoying that boat ride or whatever it is, I'm not mindful in that moment, right? Like I'm thinking about what is the next thing that's to come. And one of the things that I think we all need to focus on to be more balanced in our lives is being mindful and being present in the moment. And that's another way that the invisible load prevents that, because we're, Brian, I know you've talked about that, and you said this, Paige, like you want your wife, Brian, to have equal leisure time. And Paige, you said that's what you figured out was missing. But, if I'm going for a walk and that's my leisure time, but I'm texting and saying, hey, take care of this or do this, or I'm thinking about this, that's not true leisure time. And that mindfulness is critically important, and the invisible load is a barrier to that.
I need to reinforce something that Paige said, that's my shining star, my North Star, that I always try to aim for: equal leisure time. And then, as Dr. Wayne, I want to reinforce what you just said. That leisure time means that you are actively engaged in your leisure. If your husband and I both play pickleball, I'm thinking about pickleball. I'm not thinking about what needs to be done at home. That is how leisure time should be defined. So anyhow, I needed to reinforce that.
Can I jump into, because there was something else Paige said that really prompted me to think, because you said, I knew him for a really long time, like I thought we were good, and then all of a sudden, snowball, we weren't so good. What's really interesting, and I knew this research before we had our first child 24 years ago. My husband and I were married 7 years before we had our son. And the research shows that even in couples that have very egalitarian role attitudes and norms, right? Like you said, we had divided things up 50-50 before then. The research shows after having kids, particularly in the first year, gender roles shift much more, even among people who before that are egalitarian. They shift in these more traditional ways. And I didn't think that would happen to us. And so I'm saying this to all those people like Paige and me who are like, no, we got this. We're a 50-50 team. And then all of a sudden, for a whole lot of different reasons, that turned out not to be the case. And so you can end up with that snowball when you didn't expect that would happen to you.
Yeah. Can I just, sorry, I just want to add on to that part. I think we haven't said it out loud, but you were saying for all sorts of reasons. I think it's important, just when I talk about the mental load, I really do like to position it not just in societal conditioning and expectations, but also systemic barriers, right? So when I think about that first year of a child's life, I think about how women tend to take maternity leave, both paid and unpaid, more so than men do, even when men have it available to them. And you referenced this earlier about how men have this stigma. They're nervous about what this will do to their career. And I know a lot of women get frustrated. They're like, well, you see what it does to my career, right? We take the burden. There's a motherhood penalty. There's a wage gap when you become a mom. And part of that, people will say, well, it's obvious she took it on. She makes less money or she works less hours. And oftentimes that's just a systemic barrier that they came up against, which was lack of childcare, lack of paid leave, their partner not taking paid leave, inadequate sick time, right? All of these things are shown to disproportionately impact women. Gaps in childcare, women are twice as likely to accommodate for in their homes. And so if we're thinking about that, even the couples who really planned ahead, it's like, okay, but he doesn't have leave. And I'm going to take the unpaid leave because I gave birth and I need it. And during that time, very quietly, you take on a lot of work, and it can be very hard to transition it back, right? It just becomes a default, as we've already talked about. And so I just think it's one of those things where it can be really, really tricky to navigate. But I think there are things that we can be doing. And Brian, I don't know if you want to pop in here, but kind of like ways that men can step in these positions if they are more aware. I think that I tell people all the time, if you ended up here, it's probably not your fault. Like, it was kind of designed this way. It's very hard to avoid. But I think if we have men in the conversation working to avoid it, it can make all the difference.
So there's 3 things. I think the first thing is, I'm going to piggyback on the conversation about the fact that there's a motherhood penalty, and that we need to reframe that language to a household income penalty. Because in a country where the majority of households are dual career couples, when women are defaulted into deciding between comparing the career that they have and the income that brings in to the cost of childcare, that isn't done for men, and that women oftentimes slip into taking the more flexible job, changing careers, whatever that may be, that has compounding financial consequences that last a lifetime for the household. So for example, the Urban Institute found that for every year a woman leaves the workforce, that woman loses $295,000 in lifetime compensation, including investment earnings. Now, that's $295,000 in lifetime compensation for the household, not just for her. And in a world where women are earning 45% of women are earning the same, if not significantly more than their husbands, that doesn't make financial sense in many instances. So the first thing I do is run the numbers. I created a calculator at modernhusbands.com with Finmango, where we just simply allow people to input their financial scenario and see what the implications would look like over 15 years. And so instead of just like doing back of the napkin math, you're actually looking at how this is going to play out. And also recognizing that you can use paternity leave and maternity leave, like if both couples have it, which is not the instant. In the majority of households, that's not the instant. That's just not.
Unfortunately, no.
It's not. But if it does, you can puzzle that together to elongate how long somebody's at home. So that's the first thing is run the numbers and have an informed decision. Obviously, people have different values. They do things for different reasons, but at least make sure that it's rooted in fact. The second is, I think one of the things that Eve talked about, you were talking about Eve earlier, one of the things that she brings up, like in her book, and which I read, and I love the fair play system. I'm a fair play facilitator, is that we don't have relationships like businesses, but we should also consider the fact that we should run parts of our home like a business.
Absolutely.
That doesn't mean that our relationship isn't a business. And so the current like model of, because the bottom line is this model came from the 1950s where most women stayed home and men worked, and there was a model that was built both inside the home and outside the home for that. That model right now is absolutely tearing families apart. It does not work in most households, particularly when both partners are working full time. It's a broken model breaking marriages. And so how can we look at the dynamics within a home and say, okay, how can we be efficient? Not just avoid resentment and frustration and arguments, but what is it that we can do that can create more efficiencies in our home? And one of them is just owning a task from start to finish, right? Let's just use the dishes that never stop. I own the dishes, and I swear to God, if I won the lottery, I would throw every dish against the sidewalk. I would hire someone just to do the dishes. But like, what does that mean? That means that in your mind, you got to think, okay, I got to do the dishes tonight and run it through tonight because nobody likes to wake up with dirty dishes on the counter. Oh my gosh, I'm running a little bit low on dishwasher detergent. I've got to write that down, make sure that I go to the grocery and get that. Oh, we're having a big meal. So that means like, it's just like these never ending things that I own start to finish. I don't have to tell my wife, hey, can you go do the dishes tonight? Or, hey, we need dishwasher detergent? Or ask my wife, how can I help as she's doing the dishes? Like those kinds of things create frustration. And I know like there's pushback about when a partner asks like, how can I help? They're usually coming from a really good place. It's right. It's not like they're coming from a bad place. It's just that they haven't created systems to allow for them to understand without asking the question when emotions are high. So then cognitively, it's hard for you to have a conversation. They're asking the question at the wrong time. So that's the third thing I would point out. Have a conversation that can lead with, how can we make sure we have equal leisure time? Not how can I help? Because how can I help assumes that it's women's work. And that drives me nuts. When someone says the household labor is women's work, that women own this, makes me nauseous because that just roots in the cultural norms, societal norms that just create toxic relationships. It's not women's work. We're adults. We're adults. Gender shouldn't define who does dishes. And so sit down and say, okay, how can we have equal leisure time? That's the shining star. And then work back from there of, let's say you're using the fair play system. Let's start with 2 or 3 low stakes tasks, meaning that if somebody screws up, and they will, that the world's not going to end. So as Dr. Wayne was bringing up, there are things I can't let go. There are things that can be let go because it's not as big of a deal. So start with that, and then go through the CPE process and have a minimum standard of care. The conception, the planning, and the execution. Let your partner own that responsibility. And that's not easy either. Like if a human being's been doing a job, let's say they've been working at Procter & Gamble for 20 years, and now they're going to hand off that task to somebody else. And they still love their job. They care about their job. They're going to be inclined to micromanage that person because they've been doing it for 20 years. They know how it works for them. That's a natural thing. So it's hard for a partner who's been doing something forever to give it away and give the other partner the freedom to do it in their way, the way that they want to do it. So that has to happen. You have to agree that you're going to let someone do it in their way as long as they meet the minimum standard of care. So I probably went a little bit longer than I should have, but it's a passion point for me. But I think that if you just make sure that the tasks are divided in a way where you own it from start to finish, and you're not turning to a partner as a human calculator and calendar saying, when do I need to do this? How can I help? What can I do this? And the partner's walking around trying to be the CEO of a home while they're also a CEO in work, because that's the modern world right now.
Listeners have told us that they love the ideas we share on our podcast to manage money in the home as a team, but want more help than one episode can provide. That's why I'm excited to announce On the Same Page Consulting for corporations, couples, and individuals. Visit modernhusbands.com and click Our Services at the top of the page to learn more about how I can help you or your employees manage money in the home as a team. Again, that's modernhusbands.com. Now back to the show.
So anyway, I would love to know, Dr. Wayne, what do your findings suggest are effective ways to invite men into the space meaningfully?
Okay, so much of what you said, I just want to say I couldn't agree more. I love the analogy of running our homes like a business. Like I said, I teach leadership skills to, early to senior level leaders. And one of the things that we talk about is not micromanaging and how to delegate. And so one of the things that we teach is looking at the skill and the will of the person, right? And so skill is, do they have the competencies, the knowledge, skills, abilities to do the task? And how motivated are they, right? And so sometimes, like you're saying, when we let go, right, maybe they don't know how to do it. And initially we have to provide the instruction, the direction, the resources, and the support. But it's like teaching our kids to ride a bike, right? We can't expect them to ride a bike without the training wheels. So we are going to have to invest, help them, give them training wheels. Then we stand behind them and hold the bike. But then we got to let go, right? And your point, Brian, is what and talking about what is the standard of success? How do we define, the successful, like, do I care if the dishes are loaded a certain way in the dishwasher, or do I just care if they're clean, right? So I think that's so important that you're talking about, and not just, so really the way I would answer that question is, dialogue is so important. Having regular ongoing conversations, Paige has already talked about, they start off really, really long, and there's a lot of like frustration and resentment that might be there, but dialogue is key. And hopefully over time, we get into that routine and pattern. I've talked about weekly check-ins. So I think dialogue is so important, but I was really going to say what you just said, which is, we need men to move from helping to owning. And when they help, someone else is really still doing all the invisible labor. And so true sharing does mean taking full responsibility so that it is not just completed, but able to be off the partner's mind. And so other than the things that we've talked about, I would just add being intentional and aware, and start looking for the things you can't easily see, right? So you talked about painting a room. That's easy for me to see, but me just paying attention to the fact that the toothpaste suddenly is, there's a whole new tube of toothpaste. Wow, that didn't magically appear. Somebody had to remember that. I saw something on social media where somebody was saying, like, it's the man was saying, oh my gosh, for 8 years, I've never had to buy a tube of toothpaste, right? And so I think just being intentional about noticing what is happening and then having that conversation to say, you know what? I can do that. Let me take over the dishes, the toothpaste, the toilet paper, whatever it is, the planning the birthday party, or maybe I don't want to give up planning the birthday party because that matters, but I really don't care about the toothpaste and the toilet paper, right? And so being more aware, being more intentional, noticing, and then owning, taking, like you said, full ownership from start to finish. We have to be patient. We have to, as these things are happening, we can't expect perfection. We really need to notice progress. And then we need to express appreciation, because part of what we talked about is just feeling not seen. So we want to express, you're seen, you're valued. I see that you replaced the toilet paper or the toothpaste. It's incredible how important just being seen and heard and that validation. Now, it's not enough, right? Like, if it's completely out of whack and you're doing it, I don't care how much validation I get, I'm still drowning, right? So there does have to be a discussion of redistribution of all of these things, but also expressing appreciation. And here's where I also think men and women can be socialized differently, right? I mean, for me, I was not socialized that if I did those things, I'm supposed to pat myself on the back and make sure everybody paid attention, right? And I love my husband, but he's a look at me. Go see what I did, right? And so I think just realizing that for some of us, it's not normal or natural for us to say, look, you weren't paying attention, but I did these 500 things today behind the scenes, right? And so, again, just realize some of that cultural expectation even bleeds into that appreciation, where women are more likely to express appreciation to men for the invisible load they do, and men are less likely because it's assumed or expected of them. So dialogue, appreciation, awareness, appreciation, and ownership. I might have mixed them up, but those are the things that I think, and realizing, like Paige has said, this is not a one-shot deal, right? This is just becomes part of the fabric of your relationship. And I'll say, counseling can help. There are some relationships that, it's difficult to figure this out. The bitterness and the resentment is just so significant. I know for me, there have just been peaks and valleys of this and throughout my own relationship. And being willing to say, I may not have, a book may not be enough. A podcast may not be enough. I might need individual or marital counseling to help us work through that. And I think that's important for people to know that that's okay and that can be helpful.
And I think there's a line between somebody who can help build systems out in the home, money, domestic labor, whatever it may be, home labor, and then an actual counselor, right? And I'm glad that you pointed out that there is a line when that resentment starts to manifest into contempt. We know from John Gottman's research that that's the number one indication of divorce is contempt, and that's when you need something more than systems. You need a marriage and family therapist. But as far as systems and frameworks and tools, I would love to know from you, Paige, what has been most effective for dividing the invisible labor, the invisible work in your home?
So I think, we've talked about this a lot. Make it as visible as possible. I will say, I think we're living in this time where women in particular, we're getting ads every single day about a new digital calendar and a new app and a new AI tool that is going to solve the mental load for us. You can outsource, you can get a house manager, right? I think we're inundated with all these ways to do this. When in reality, I think it can be as simple as making it visible in a way that works for your family. So my partner and I work differently. He's neurodivergent. I am not. I like to work on my phone. He likes to work with pen and paper. But what we both do is we both have running lists of what we are accountable to. So we have our when we originally made the invisible visible, we put it in a spreadsheet because for me, I wanted to be able to quantify it. I wanted to be able to see how many tasks am I doing? How many tasks is he doing? Does it feel fair? Can we rebalance? I wanted to be able to revisit it for that accountability portion that you just referenced, which was I wanted to be able to say to my partner, I could have sworn you signed up for the dishwasher. And like this in the doc, if we look back on September 22, we changed these things. And yet I've done the dishwasher 6 days in a row and I'm a little confused. So let's have a conversation, right? Like let's sit down and let's talk about it. The accountability didn't just lie with me. We could go back to this document and say like, hey, you filled out your name on this one. You said you got it. You don't. So how do we adjust that? If it's not working, then let's talk about why it's not working. But I think for a lot of people, when you don't have that secondary accountability tool where you can go back and look and say like, hey, this is how we've divided it up, it can be hard. And I actually learned this working in corporate. I remember being in a meeting once and we had incredibly clear accountabilities in our company and we had outlines of what everybody was accountable to within our business and in our org. And so when we would come into a meeting and a deliverable wasn't met, everyone on the team knew who had been accountable for that. Like we all knew who was accountable to that thing. And, we don't want to run our marriages like a business, but our home is a business. Like this is a functioning thing. There's money in here. There are people, there's deliverables. Like we have to get stuff done. And so, I do think that can be really, really helpful. And I would say, secondary to that, the framework that we use is open conversation without that emotion now that we've gotten to this point. And I want to jump into the resentment thing. I tell people all the time, the work of rebuilding this for my partner and I took almost a year and a half. And everybody's like, that sounds crazy. It took a year and a half for him to figure out the chores. And I say, absolutely not. It didn't take him a year and a half to figure out the chores or the mental load. It took us a year and a half to rebuild from where we were, for me to trust that he would do something, because he would always say, yes, I've got it. And he would do it for 3 weeks and then he would fall off, right? This was before we put a system in place. And I think this is very common. Women come to me all the time. They say, my husband said he would do it and he did it for a month and then he forgot and then he was traveling for work and then he just stopped doing it and it became mine again. And that breaks your partner's trust. They don't trust you anymore, right? And that adds to the resentment. And so that is what took us 18 months to rebuild. That is what we had to get through. I had to know I could trust him, that I could count on him, that he wasn't just saying he was going to be accountable, that he actually was accountable to these things. And having these tools there to help guide us and to constantly reference back to was really, really helpful. And so now I think things that help us is we have a digital calendar. I know I just joked about that, but we do have a digital calendar because we're even getting our kids involved now. I say, hey, look at the calendar. Is your library book due today? Do you have baseball today?
Bravo.
What is your to-do list, kiddo? You learned how to read. You can use this calendar. And I've actually heard people say they use emojis for their younger kids. So it'll be like an emoji of a book or something, so their kids know what they have to do. And so my husband no longer says, what do we have today? He goes, I looked at the calendar. It looks like you're going to dance. I'll take him to baseball. And we're not having a conversation because we have these tools to help us along the way. And so it doesn't have to be a digital calendar. It can literally just be a Google Calendar that you share on your phone. It can be a spreadsheet. It can be anything. But having a framework to say, this is what I own, this is what you own, but we are both here to support each other. So when I travel for work, I don't have to delegate to my husband. He just knows what happens and he steps in, and same thing. I do the same thing for him. And so it's really about teamwork and working together to make your home operate as smoothly as possible, because that's the goal, right? Like you want that to be operating so you can enjoy your life. You don't want to be talking about the dishes every day. You want to be talking about the things that you enjoy, with your partner, and not logistics at all times.
Well, first of all, if I did not have our Google Calendar, I don't know what I would do.
It's the Bible. Yeah.
It is oh my gosh. And they put their own things in there. We have a family calendar. I can't wrap my mind around A, not having it, and then B, relying on only my wife to run it. Like I can't, like we all add to that. I need to give a shout out to Persist. I
Mm,
love that app because they have this care load assessment, and
yeah.
within it's like a series of 75 questions about the home labor. And then the conclusion is a report. And what I
Yeah.
love about that is that when you do have your household meeting, when your emotions are low on a Saturday morning, let's say, um, it quantifies the mental load. It shows you that. And I think that unless you, Dr. Wayne, you were talking about this earlier, unless you make the invisible visible, it's hard to wrap your mind around that. And so
Hmm.
when you're going through assigning who's doing what, knowing that there is a greater mental load for some things compared to others needs to be a factor, or emotional load. And we'll get to that in 1 second. But I do want to share a couple simple tricks for partners who want to immediately begin reducing the mental load for each other. So I think like the first thing to recognize is that when you start to work through having these conversations, again, they have to be at a time when emotion's low, so cognition can be high. But let's say that you want to take some baby steps. Obviously, grabbing 2 or 3 tasks in the beginning where, like, let's say they're new for you. They should probably be something in the beginning that you're either naturally good at, like you have a good skill set for, or you're passionate about. Right. So, like, I love to cook. It takes a lot of time, but I enjoy to cook. I'm a financial expert, so obviously I manage our day-to-day finances. So those are things that naturally fit. Now, that would be the task that I would do. But let's say, for example, that you have a busy partner and that you want to go beyond the systems, recognizing that there are just wild cards. There are things in your daily lives that are not divided up that you have to deal with. So, as an example, my wife and I are going to Miami next week. She's going on work. I can work from anywhere, and I'm obviously going to go with her because I can work from anywhere. My kids are old enough, but her friend wrote her like this really long list of things that can be done in Miami. So here's something that you can do to reduce the mental load. I bolded the things that I thought we would like, didn't take out the others, and just said, just start here. And she's like, oh yeah, I kind of like these. And then and that took about 30 seconds. Then I went back and then I created on the days that we're going to be in these different places, the hyperlinks of here are these activities that we selected. Is there anything that we're missing or you want eliminated? That took her about 20 seconds. So it's like a short, like true false kind of quiz. And then, okay, that's going to be done. And then now that that's done, I will upload it into our calendar. So did it take about an hour of work for me? Yeah. And it was mainly the mental load. It took about 3 minutes for her. And that's like a little thing that you can do. So if you can like, for example, what do you want to do tonight, honey? What do you want to do this weekend? Well, if it's Friday and you're exhausted, or you're like Paige and you have 4 kids, I can't wrap my mind around that. My goodness gracious. And your oldest is how old?
8.
Oh my God. 8 and younger? Oh my God.
No wonder you've become an expert at this.
Yeah. Oh my. Oh.
I'm just living it.
Hey, what would you like to do? So like I will just give her 2 options. Like, hey, how about we do this or this? And if you don't like any of these, let's have a conversation. So it's like really simple, low lift. Oh, this sounds good. And then I'll just handle organizing it. So try to like really, because otherwise it's what's called decision inertia, where you have so many different options and it's so exhausting. The default on Friday night is when you're considering all these things, it's like, let's just watch Netflix. Because you don't want to go through all of the mental gymnastics of organizing anything. So make it simple for your partner. A, B. Okay, we'll do B. I'll take care of organizing it, and then you just go. Dr. Wayne, can you explain the difference between emotional labor and mental labor, and share which is more taxing and why?
Yeah. So I got interested in this because a colleague and I were meeting at a conference, and before our meeting, we were both on the phone with our spouses, kind of saying, "Hey, remember the lasagna's there, and this and that." And so, when we started this research, we looked at the popular press, we looked at the academic literature, how they talked about this, and then we just asked people, right? Like, what are the things that you do that people can't see that require you to kind of run your home or your family? And we found that things came into kind of three big buckets. One is the cognitive load, keeping track of, paying attention to, remembering, deciding, solving problems. Then there was the managerial, right? Scheduling, organizing, planning. The trip to Miami would be an example. And then the third, people talked about just worrying and being the emotional anchor, solving conflict. Again, just this emotional aspect. And so we went in with our anecdotal, thinking. We also asked them, how does this affect you? How does it affect your family? How does it affect you at work? How does it help you, positively? How does it hurt you? And we were surprised because there were all the bitterness, frustration, exhaustion, resentment, but there was also, I love being the leader of my family. I like solving problems in my family. And so we were like, wait, what's happening here, right? And so ultimately we found out that it was this, I see we're close on time, so I'll just cut it really short here.
No, that's okay.
Is just the notion that the emotional load is the one that is really, really draining for people. It was associated with poor sleep, depression, just overall poor mental health, lower life satisfaction, family satisfaction across the board. There were some positives to being the decision maker in your family, the cognitive load, but by far, emotional load, every outcome we measured, it was negatively related. And so we've been talking a lot about the distribution within your relationship. And certainly not everybody's in a partnered relationship, but we also, it's just the magnitude of this emotional load. Even if somebody else is carrying some of it, the more we carry as individuals across the board was really, really detrimental.
I wanted to close on that question because I saw a reel of someone who was sharing like that they were taking their child to special educational services, right? And what I saw there is, first of all, as a former educator, I know that all of that's entailed. So it's just like the mental load of that, but it's the emotional labor of worrying. Like, I want to make sure that I give my child all of the support that they need. And the weight of that is just so much heavier than doing the dishes. And it's not scorekeeping. It's not, you can't put that on a card and say like, oh, these are the same things, because the dish card would be like this then. And the worrying about your kids is like so much more. So I wanted to end on that question because I want partners to recognize when there's really heavy emotional labor going on in your home, that you need to take that into consideration when you're trying to create equity.
And I want to clarify,
please go ahead.
Because sometimes it's easy to say, this person's just a worrier. We controlled for people's general tendency to worry. That does affect all of these well-being outcomes. But what we found is specifically the worry you're talking about, worrying about my family, their health, their well-being, that above and beyond a person's general tendency to worry is really harmful. So I don't want people to think, oh, that's just Brian, he's a worrier, right? This is a specific form of worrying about our family that's particularly harmful. And you're absolutely right. When we're concerned about the health and well-being and development of our children, it's taxing.
Don't leave just yet. Be sure to like and subscribe before you do. And a reminder to visit modernhusbands.com if you're looking for money and home management support in your life. Just click the Our Services button at the top of the page. Again, that's at modernhusbands.com. And many thanks to our co-hosts, our guests, and of course, all of you for joining today.